Marriage in ancient Rome is often imagined as a dignified alliance between families, sealed by ceremony, feasts, and tradition, statues, poems, and legal texts presented as orderly and respectable. But beneath the polished surface of Roman society existed a far darker reality, one that unfolded, not in public forums or temples, but behind closed doors on the wedding night. For many Roman brides, this night was not a beginning of partnership, but a moment of fear, loss, and irreversible submission. What Rome celebrated in daylight concealed rituals of control carried out in darkness. These customs were not accidents or excesses, they were deliberate, symbolic acts meant to reinforce power, hierarchy, and ownership. The wedding night was where Roman authority over women became most visible and most terrifying. Before we continue, we'd like to know where you're watching from. Share your country or region in the comments to show how far this hidden history of ancient Rome is reaching across the world. In Roman society, marriage was less about affection and more about structure. Legally and symbolically, she moved from the authority of her father to the authority of her husband. This transfer was not subtle. It was reinforced through ritual, language, and public expectation. One of the most unsettling aspects of Roman weddings was how aggressively this transfer was staged. During the procession to her husband's house, a bride was expected to appear reluctant. Sources describe brides being ceremonially pulled away, sometimes lifted or guided forcefully across the threshold. This was not random behavior, it symbolized the idea that no respectable woman should willingly desire marriage. Her resistance was scripted, meant to reflect modesty, obedience, and loss of autonomy. This staged resistance did not end with the procession. It set the tone for what followed. Roman writers openly acknowledged that fear was considered normal for brides. In fact, it was expected. Young women, often teenagers married to much older men, entered marriages with little understanding of what awaited them. These details are often excluded from popular history, and your support helps bring them into the open. The wedding night itself was surrounded by ritual meant to erase a woman's former identity. Brides wore symbolic garments tied in complex knots, supposedly to represent chastity and order. The untying of these knots was loaded with meaning. It marked the end of her previous self. From that moment forward, she existed primarily as a wife, and eventually, as a producer of heirs. Roman society treated this night not as a private matter, but as a duty. Family members and attendants waited outside, listening for signs that the marriage had been consummated. Proof mattered more than comfort. The bride's experience was secondary to the confirmation that the transfer of authority had been completed. What made this especially disturbing was the complete absence of consent as a concept. Roman law did not require a woman's agreement beyond the arrangements made by male guardians. Once married, her body was no longer considered her own. It was tied to family honor, inheritance, and social order. The wedding night was where this reality became unavoidable. Roman texts rarely describe a bride's emotions directly, but the silence is telling. When women are mentioned, it is through male voices that emphasize obedience, endurance, and duty. Fear was normalized. Discomfort was irrelevant. What mattered was compliance. If you're finding this history unsettling, share your thoughts in the comments. Do these rituals change how you view Roman civilization? Some customs were explicitly designed to intimidate. Jokes, crude chants, and mocking songs were often performed by guests during wedding celebrations. While framed as humor or tradition, they served to remind the bride of her vulnerability. She was being watched, judged, and stripped of privacy even before the wedding night began. Even the threshold of the husband's house carried symbolic violence. Brides were lifted over it, supposedly to avoid bad luck, but the meaning ran deeper. She did not enter on her own terms. She was carried, placed, delivered. The message was clear. This space was not hers by right, only by permission. Roman men were raised to see this as normal. Authority over a wife was part of masculinity. Legal texts gave husbands extensive control, including the right to discipline. The wedding night was the first demonstration of that power, wrapped in rituals so deeply ingrained that it appeared natural rather than imposed. What makes these customs especially chilling is how openly they were accepted. Philosophers, lawmakers, and poets all reinforced the idea that social order required female submission. The fear of brides was not a flaw in the system, it was evidence that the system was working. If you're still watching, make sure to like the video and leave a comment. These conversations matter because history often hides cruelty behind tradition. Over time, Rome worked hard to present itself as refined and moral, especially compared to barbarian cultures. But these wedding night rituals reveal a different truth. Civilization did not erase cruelty, it formalized it. Ritual gave violence structure. Tradition gave it legitimacy. Once the door closed on the wedding night, the protections of ritual vanished, but the power dynamics they enforced became absolute. Roman law was clear in its silence. What happened between husband and wife was not a matter for sympathy or scrutiny. The bride's fear, confusion, or pain had no legal meaning. For many Roman women, that first night marked the permanent loss of personal agency. They were expected to submit not only physically, but psychologically. Obedience on the wedding night was seen as a test proof that a woman would accept her new role. Without resistance, any sign of refusal or distress was interpreted as immaturity or defiance, not as suffering. Roman writers occasionally hinted at this reality, though never with compassion. Advice texts instructed husbands to assert authority early, reinforcing dominance from the very beginning of marriage. The wedding night was not framed as mutual discovery, but as the moment hierarchy was established. Once set, it was meant to last a lifetime. What made the system especially effective was how thoroughly it was protected by law. Under many forms of Roman marriage, a woman fell under the legal control of her husband. He had the authority to discipline her, manage her property, and determine her role within the household. Complaints were nearly impossible. A woman's suffering was invisible unless it threatened family honor, and even then, blame often fell on her. If this part of the story is affecting you, take a moment to pause and share your reaction in the comments. Do you think Rome's reputation for order justified these customs? Or does it expose something far darker? Roman society justified these practices through tradition and morality. Philosophers argued that order required hierarchy, and hierarchy required submission. Women were portrayed as naturally weaker, more emotional, and in need of control. These ideas were repeated so often that they became unquestioned truths, woven into law, religion, and daily life. Even motherhood, often idealized in Roman culture, was tied back to the wedding night. A woman's value increased only after she produced children, preferably sons. Failure to conceive could result in blame, neglect, or replacement. The wedding night was not the end of fear. It was the beginning of a lifelong evaluation based on obedience and fertility. Later Roman writers attempted to soften these realities. As Rome evolved and Christianity began to influence moral narratives, descriptions of marriage grew more restrained. Consent was hinted at. Mutual respect was discussed in theory, but these later interpretations often served to obscure earlier practices rather than confront them. The darker rituals were quietly omitted, refrained, or dismissed as misunderstandings. This erasure was deliberate. Rome's legacy depended on being remembered as a foundation of law and civilization. Acknowledging that marriage, one of society's most sacred institutions, was built on coercion and fear, threatened that image. So the wedding night rituals faded from popular memory preserved only in fragments of texts, legal codes, and passing references historians had to piece together. If you find value in uncovering these buried truths, don't forget to like the video. It helps ensure that history isn't remembered only as the powerful wanted it to be. What's especially striking is how normalized these experiences were. Roman women grew up knowing what awaited them. Mothers prepared daughters not with comfort, but with instruction on endurance. Silence was survival. Acceptance was safety. The wedding night was not an isolated trauma, it was part of a continuum of control that defined a woman's entire life. Men, meanwhile, were taught that authority was their right. The rituals reassured them that dominance was not cruelty, but tradition. By framing control as culture, Rome removed the need for justification. The system sustained itself because no one in power had reason to question it. Modern audiences often struggle with this reality because it clashes with the grandeur associated with ancient Rome. Marble statues and epic histories do not show fear, confusion, or loss, but those emotions existed, hidden behind walls and rituals, experienced by countless women whose names history never recorded. If this story has changed how you see Roman society, let us know in the comments your perspective as to the conversation about how we remember the past. In the end, the horrifying wedding night ritual Rome tried to erase reveals a deeper truth about power. Civilization does not automatically mean compassion. Law does not always protect the vulnerable, and tradition, when left unchallenged, can become a tool of cruelty rather than community. The wedding night in ancient Rome was not simply a private moment. It was a public statement enforced in private. It declared ownership, erased autonomy, and reinforced a system where fear was normalized and silence was expected. History prefers to remember Rome's roads, laws, and empires. But behind those achievements were lives shaped by control and suffering. Remembering these rituals does not diminish history, it completes it. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, like the video and share your thoughts, because the darkest parts of history are often the ones most desperately hidden and the most important to confront.